Now, for a moment, I almost forgot about the A series from Samsung, and when they announced the A series, I went, oh yeah. But I was still skeptical whether or not it's going to be good. However, when they said that the price of the Galaxy A56 was priced at 1,999 ringgit, it was my duty to tell you if this phone was worth the price, especially with many other phones having similar prices like the Nothing Phone 3A Pro or even the previously reviewed Redmi Note 14 Pro Plus. Now, in terms of the design, although it might seem like they copied what they did on the base S25, but plot twist, or the good news is that they didn't. Because this design feels refreshing, and not only for the eyes but also on the hands as well. It has an aluminum frame with a sort of a bump at the power and the volume buttons. While many thought that it was weird at first, but for me, I actually loved it because it makes you feel, or makes me feel, the buttons better, and it also gives a better grip. Now, the phone has a glass back which adds to the entire premium feel of the phone. Now, this is called the Awesome Light Grey, which does look more like white. And then there's also other colors too, like the Awesome Graphite, Awesome Olive, and Awesome Pink. Now, going back to the glass finish at the back, it uses Corning's Gorilla Glass Victus Plus and is also used for the front as well. Now, while it is the same as last year's A55, but this did give me a more tougher vibes, even with the display looking more reflective than the flagships. Now, all of this sounds like good news because yeah, it is good news, but the not so good news is that just like the flagship, this will definitely wobble if you type the phone on a surface. Now, aesthetically, I do prefer the more blacked out camera modules that the flagship had, but in terms of the design and the overall build quality, I would give this a 4.5 out of 5. Now, moving over to the display, this 6.7-inch 1080p 120Hz AMOLED display is what stands out the most on this particular phone. Like, literally. And that has to be expected since it is a Samsung phone. Now, the bezels are slightly smaller compared to last year's Galaxy A55, but the only thing to nitpick is that there is a slight chin at the bottom, so it is not particularly uniform per se, but that is of course to be expected, especially for a phone within this price range. So to distract myself from being spoiled by all the amazing flagships with their fantastic displays on the S-series phones, I downloaded the darker theme wallpaper from my buddy Daniel from Zonotech on his Wallpapers app, which immediately solved my tiny visual distractions. Now, based on my daily use for the past week, the screen was plenty bright with a typical brightness value of 1200 nits and a peak brightness of 1900 nits. And the in-display fingerprint sensor is not the ultrasonic ones, which means that you won't be able to unlock the phone if your fingers are wet. So while the phone has an IP67 rating, swimming pool selfies will have to wait because you'll need to dry those fingers first before you can actually unlock the phone. But while I could work around that, one issue that I found a little annoying is that there is that sort of an animation where if you unlock the phone using this fingerprint sensor, it feels slow because of that. So I would advise to go to your vision enhancement in the settings menu and toggle the reduce animations. But of course, it is still not as fast as the flagship ultrasonic fingerprint sensors. And there's another thing that I really love about Samsung phones is that in that particular vision enhancement settings, there's the extra dim toggle which made using the phone under low light or even at night really great. So because of this, I would give a 4 out of 5 for the phone screen. Then as for the cameras, I will not go too technical on the specs, but instead I'll tell you what's really good and which areas that really kind of made it feel like a mid-range smartphone. The ultra-wide lenses during the day were decent. The edges did look tiny distorted, but the dynamic range was handled well. The main 50 megapixel lens for me was the best, but this really made the phone's photo look like a flagship phone, even when zoom up to the maximum 10 times zoom. Then the rear portrait mode during the day and also at night for humans and objects were really good, but probably not the best when it comes to the edge detection for pets. Then the dedicated macro lens on the phone was very disappointing. Now, first of all, I'm not a fan of this dedicated lens in the first place. And second of all, it is not easy to nail a focus and you will need lots of light to get a proper macro focus shots. But as for portrait selfie photos, during the day were amazing, even with two people in the shot, and so was the nighttime selfies as well. Then the ultra-wide photos at night were not the best, even so for the main lenses too, but sometimes if you get the focus and the overall exposure right, it did do a decent job. Now, based on some reviews I saw online, there were some major complaints about the camera app having a shutter delay, but that was something that I never had any issues during my 1 week of use. Probably because there was a software update that rolled out before I started using the phone, but no issues on the camera app's shutter button for me. Then video recording for the rear can go up to 4K 30 FPS on the ultra-wide lenses. It did very well, but there was a slight color shift on the main lenses, switching over when you go from the ultra-wide to the main lenses, where it does seem that the ultra-wide lenses does oversaturate the footage more. Now, while the image stabilization for the front camera was awesome, really good, but the dynamic range for the background can be overexposed if it's too bright. Then the quality and the stabilization for the ultra-wide lenses at night were not as good as the main lenses, but the front video recording at night was quite decent based on this videos taken. So for the cameras, I would give this a 3.5 out of 5. But here's a quick vlogging test to hear how the audio recording is using the front cameras for a vlogging situation, so you can be the judge. Okay, so this is an audio test using the front camera. I have a ceiling fan right on top, so let's see whether or not that cuts down the overall sound when it comes to video recording for the front camera. Test 1, 2, test 1, 2, test 1, 2. Now, if you guys are enjoying this video, a nice big thumbs up would be very much appreciated to tell YouTube that this video was okay. And a subscription would be lovely too, as we are going towards the milestone of 200,000 subscribers. So thank you, and thank you in advance. So of course, the software is where the phone also really stands out from the rest. Now, the phone comes with One UI version 7 on top of Android 15. Now, if you've been watching our reviews, especially when it comes to Samsung phones, you already know how I feel about One UI 7 or One UI in general. But if it's your very first time here, honestly guys, it's one of the best Android skins around, especially with the new One UI 7, where the overall optimization was really great, because Samsung has also added a bunch of minor little tweaks to make the entire use experience or the usage experience way better, and that is the part that makes this phone stand out compared to any other smartphone within this price range. But another part is the fact that Samsung is also promising 6 generations of software updates and 6 years of security updates, so this phone can really last you a while. Then of course, Galaxy AI is here, and that is something that everyone can agree with on how amazing their AI software features are compared to any other smartphones, especially the iPhone. And together with the dedicated ones from Google, it is still one of the best phones when it comes to software optimization, the usage, and of course, a more useful AI features that you would actually use daily, which I did cover in depth in my review of the S25 Ultra, so do check out that video over here if you haven't. Then on the inside, the phone comes with the Exynos 1580 chipset or 1580 chipset. Now yes, it may not be as great as Snapdragon chipsets, but hear me out. It is a 4nm chip, which lines up pretty well from a day-to-day use. And no, I'm not the kind of person who does benchmark tests, as I find that putting my SIM card inside while using the phone daily would be the best way to really know if this phone holds up daily very well or not. And yes, it did. It comes with 12GB of RAM with 256GB of storage here in Malaysia, so there's plenty of RAM for all of your AI needs or even the overall multitasking. But when it comes to gaming, here's where the results were interesting. But before that, when it comes to software, I would give this phone a 5 out of 5. Now, if you want a written version of everything mentioned in this video, we do have one, and all of our videos have a written version, which is at our website at www.adamlobo.tv. Links to the website will be down below, where we also have some daily tech news over there too. So when it comes to gaming, easy or not so heavy games like Asphalt Legends Unite ran extremely well. But for heavy graphic games like Genshin Impact, it ran surprisingly very well for a mid-range phone at high graphics at 60 FPS. Now the graphics looks nice and so was the texture in the game too, thanks to the display as well. Then in terms of comfort, I did find that if you game for long periods, this camera bump at the back does make it feel a little uncomfortable. As for heat, it did become warm at about 15 minutes or so, but if you want, you can push it to the higher settings in Genshin Impact by toggling the performance mode, and while it did run very well, but it made the phone a bit more hotter than how it was previously. So do keep that in mind. So with that, I would rate the gaming performance a 4 out of 5. Now another surprising area was the phone's battery performance, because while it did come with a 5000 milliamps of battery, the amount of screen on time that I got was an average about 4 hours plus, but that is with a very heavy use. At max, I could stretch up to 5 hours, and here's where the battery optimization for the Exynos chip might not be as good as what the Snapdragon or even MediaTek provides for their powered phones. But the real saving grace is the upgraded 45 watts of wired charging compared to last year's 25 watts. Now it has a glass back, but keep in mind there is no wireless charging, and that is also to be expected for a phone within this price range. Okay, so everything does seem very well and great for a 1999 ringgit phone, but where I see this phone best at is the overall build quality, the software optimization and support, the cameras, especially for during the day kind of shots where it was really flagship level, and as for the other areas is where you might start to realize that this is a mid-range smartphone. But with everything being said, I would still recommend this phone compared to the others out right now. But if you have the extra budget, you can look at the base model S25 instead, where you'll find my in-depth review of that over here.